Why do some of the smartest people you know stay in the worst relationships of their lives? It isn't because they don't see the red flags. They do. It isn't because they don't know better. They absolutely know. The real answer is far more uncomfortable and far more human. In this video, we're going to break down the hidden reasons intelligence can actually trap you in toxic love. It's one of the strangest paradoxes in human behavior. How can people who are considered intelligent, people who see patterns, who solve complex problems, who can analyze situations with razor-sharp clarity, end up trapped in toxic relationships? You'd think intelligence would serve as armor, that with enough awareness, someone could detect manipulation, recognize abuse, and walk away without hesitation. Yet, countless smart people, doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, even psychologists, often find themselves stuck in the very relationships they'd warned their friends to avoid. And here lies the hidden shame. Because the pain isn't only in the relationship itself, it's in the self-reflection. The constant whisper, "I should know better. Why am I still here?" It's the sting of contradiction, the clash between logic and emotion. People who pride themselves on their intellect suddenly feel stripped of their own credibility, as if their intelligence evaporates the moment love and attachment come into play. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Being smart doesn't make you immune to pain. In some cases, it makes the pain worse. Why? Because intelligent people don't just feel. They overthink. They rationalize. They build elaborate justifications for why things are the way they are. They replay conversations, analyze motives, and convince themselves that the toxicity is temporary or that their partner's behavior has hidden reasons that only they can understand. Their brain becomes their own trap. And in the middle of this cycle, shame sets in. Imagine sitting in silence after yet another fight, knowing with absolute clarity that this isn't right for you. And yet the thought of leaving feels impossible. That gap between knowing and doing is where shame festers. Smart people ask themselves, am I weak? Am I not as intelligent as I thought? Why can I solve every problem in my career but not this? And that shame is isolating. It prevents people from reaching out for help, because how do you admit, yes, I have a master's degree, I run a company, I've read every book on psychology, and still I can't walk away? That confession feels humiliating. But maybe the paradox isn't a weakness. It's a reminder that intelligence and emotion don't play by the same rules. Knowing something in theory is not the same as living it in reality. Logic might tell you, leave, but fear, love, and hope whisper louder. The puzzle of intelligence and pain is not about stupidity or ignorance. It's about the collision of knowledge with deeply human needs, the need for love, for belonging, for validation, needs so powerful they can override even the sharpest mind. And so, smart people stay, not because they don't know better, but because knowing better isn't always enough. That's the puzzle. And the first step to solving it is admitting that intelligence is not immunity. It's the most exhausting tug of war. The head says, leave. The heart whispers, stay. This is where intelligence collides with attachment. On paper, it's simple. When something harms you, you walk away. But relationships are not equations. They are bonds stitched together by memories, hopes, and 1,000 tiny emotional threads that no amount of logic can neatly cut. The brain knows the facts. It lists them clearly. They lie. They manipulate. They drain you. The conclusion is obvious. This relationship is toxic. End it. But the heart doesn't work in bullet points. It remembers the moments of kindness, the rare softness, the promises of change. It clings to the illusion that the person you love is still in there somewhere, waiting to return. And so, even when your mind screams for freedom, your emotions build a case for staying, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, but always there. Intelligence, then, becomes less of a weapon and more of a burden. Smart people often think they can out-reason their own emotions. They analyze the relationship endlessly, believing that if they just understand why it's toxic, they'll finally find the strength to leave. But understanding doesn't erase attachment. Knowledge can't extinguish the comfort of familiarity or the fear of being alone. Think about it. When you've invested years into a relationship, your identity becomes woven into theirs. Walking away feels less like a choice and more like tearing yourself apart. The brain says it's survival. The heart says it's self-destruction. Which voice do you obey? This is where the paradox deepens. Because smart people know better, they assume they should be able to act better. But emotions don't respond to logic. They respond to longing, to fear, to the subtle pull of connection. That's why someone can recognize every red flag and still stay. It's not weakness. It's human wiring. Our brains are designed to seek connection even when connection hurts. Love activates the same neural pathways as addiction. It rewards, it withdraws, it punishes, it soothes. And like any addiction, logic alone cannot break the cycle. You can't simply think your way out of attachment. So when the head says leave and the heart says stay, the war inside becomes unbearable. Every decision feels wrong. Leaving feels like betrayal. Staying feels like self-destruction. And in that paralysis, many people remain exactly where they are. Stuck, suspended between what they know and what they feel. That's the tragedy of intelligence in love. You can diagnose the problem with perfect clarity, yet still fail to escape it. Not because you don't know better, but because knowledge and emotion speak different languages. And in toxic relationships, it's usually the heart that wins the argument. One of the most dangerous traps for intelligent people in toxic relationships is what I call the fixer's delusion. Smart people pride themselves on solving problems. It's what makes them successful in careers, studies, and even everyday life. They see patterns others miss. They untangle complexity. They believe that with enough effort, persistence, or insight, they can find a solution where others only see failure. So when they step into a relationship with someone who is broken, inconsistent, or toxic, they see it less as a red flag and more as a challenge, a puzzle waiting to be solved. The toxic partner learns this quickly. They notice the fixer's mindset, the willingness to stay, to work harder, to forgive, to understand. And so they lean into their brokenness, but only just enough. They show glimpses of vulnerability, flashes of trauma, slivers of hope that suggest they want to change, if only someone could help them. And the intelligent partner takes the bait. They tell themselves, I can do what others couldn't. I can be the one who saves them. If I just give more patience, more love, more effort, they'll finally transform. It feels noble. It feels purposeful. But in reality, it's a trap. Because the toxic partner never fully heals, never fully changes. They remain just broken enough to keep the fixer invested, dangling the reward of change like a carrot on a string. This is the cruel genius of toxic dynamics. The more you try to fix them, the deeper you sink. Every setback feels like progress delayed rather than progress denied. Every tiny gesture of improvement feels like proof that change is coming. But it never really arrives. And here's where intelligence becomes the enemy. Smart people believe their resilience, insight, or strategy will eventually pay off. They convince themselves that walking away would mean failure, that all their effort, empathy, and sacrifice would go to waste. So they double down, they try harder, they refuse to quit. But love is not a project, and people are not problems to be solved. The fixer's delusion keeps intelligent people trapped because it attaches their self-worth to their partner's potential. They begin to believe that if they can't fix the relationship, it says something about them, that they weren't strong enough, smart enough, or patient enough. The relationship becomes a test of their capability, not a reflection of their partner's toxicity. And so, they stay. Not because they don't see the harm, not because they don't know better, but because they can't resist the urge to prove themselves through fixing someone else. The tragedy is this: toxic partners don't need saving, they need accountability. And until the fixer recognizes that, they'll continue pouring intelligence, love, and effort into someone who was never going to change. That is the fixer's delusion. And for many smart people, it's the very reason they remain in relationships that slowly break them. Why do people stay in toxic relationships long after they realize the damage being done? One powerful reason is what I call the prison of investment. It starts innocently enough. You've already poured time, energy, and sacrifice into the relationship. Maybe it's been years. Maybe you've endured countless arguments, compromises, or apologies. Somewhere deep down you tell yourself, I can't just walk away now. I've given too much. This is the sunk cost fallacy, the same mental trap that keeps people holding on to bad investments, failed projects, or losing bets. We hate the idea of wasting what we've already spent. In love, that spending isn't money. It's pieces of our life, birthdays shared, secrets revealed, nights spent trying to heal someone else's wounds. So instead of cutting our losses, we double down. We convince ourselves that leaving would mean all of it was meaningless. And because humans crave meaning, we hold on, hoping the relationship will eventually pay off, so the suffering won't feel wasted. But here's the paradox. The more you invest, the harder it becomes to leave. Every sacrifice becomes another chain. Every compromise, another lock on the door. Instead of freeing you, your effort imprisons you. Smart people are especially vulnerable here. They tell themselves, I wouldn't have stayed this long if it wasn't worth it. They rationalize that all the patience, forgiveness, and late-night tears must lead to something better in the future. After all, smart people don't like to admit they've made the wrong choice. The ego resists the idea of failure. And so, the cycle continues. This prison of investment is powerful because it disguises itself as loyalty. You feel proud of your endurance, of your ability to weather storms. You tell yourself that walking away is quitting, that it's weak. But in reality, staying becomes the easier option. Not because it's right, but because it avoids the painful truth. Sometimes, all that effort really was wasted. That's the hardest pill to swallow. That years of love, sacrifice, and compromise may never transform into the relationship you imagined. That no matter how much you've given, you cannot change the ending. And so, people stay, not out of love, but out of fear. Fear that leaving will invalidate everything they've poured in. Fear that walking away means admitting they chose wrong. But here's the reality. The longer you stay in a toxic relationship, the more you lose. Time is not a currency you can get back. Effort spent on someone unwilling to change is effort stolen from your own future. The sunk cost fallacy whispers, don't waste what you've given. But the truth is, staying only wastes what you have left. The prison of investment keeps smart people trapped, not because they don't know the door is open, but because they believe walking out makes their sacrifice meaningless. In reality, the meaning comes from choosing yourself before you lose even more. One of the most unsettling truths about toxic relationships is this: your brain may betray you. Love, especially toxic love, doesn't just live in the heart, it lives in chemistry. Neurotransmitters like dopamine and oxytocin shape how we bond, how we crave, and how we stay attached. And when a relationship becomes a cycle of highs and lows, your brain begins to respond in ways that look almost identical to addiction. Here's how it works. In a healthy relationship, dopamine, the reward chemical, releases consistently through affection, trust, and stability. But in toxic dynamics, dopamine comes in unpredictable bursts. After a fight, after days of cold silence, your partner suddenly shows affection. A text, a smile, an apology. That small moment of warmth feels euphoric because it arrives after so much pain. This is called intermittent reinforcement, and it's the same psychological principle casinos use to keep gamblers hooked. You never know when the reward is coming, but when it does, the high is powerful. And so, you stay, even when most of the time, the relationship feels like suffering. Smart people often recognize this. They can explain the cycle, name the chemicals, even point out the manipulation at work. Yet, knowing doesn't weaken the craving. Because your brain doesn't respond to logic, it responds to survival wiring. It keeps chasing the spike. This is why intelligent people stay even when they know they're trapped. They can describe the pattern as if teaching a psychology class: fight, withdrawal, reconciliation, relief. But when that rush of dopamine hits, all the knowledge in the world can't compete. And here's the paradox. The same intelligence that helps them identify the cycle also keeps them trapped in it. They tell themselves, if I understand it, I can control it. If I can control it, I can win. But chemistry is not conquered by logic. It takes time, distance, and withdrawal, just like any other addiction. Meanwhile, the toxic partner benefits. They may not know the science, but they instinctively sense the power of withholding and rewarding. They keep the cycle alive: coldness, then warmth; cruelty, then comfort; breaking you down, then patching you up. And your brain, desperate for that relief, binds you tighter and tighter to them. The shame is overwhelming. Smart people tell themselves, I can't believe I'm acting like an addict. I know better. But that shame is misplaced, because in truth, their brain is simply doing what brains do, prioritizing short bursts of pleasure over long-term well-being. That's the betrayal. Knowledge doesn't erase craving. Intelligence doesn't immunize you from chemistry. You can map the entire cycle and still be caught in its grip. Toxic relationships hijack the very system that's supposed to protect us. And until you treat the attachment like an addiction, something that requires detox, not just insight, you remain vulnerable. That's why smart people stay. Not because they're blind, not because they're foolish, but because their own brain is working against them. When smart people stay in toxic relationships, one of their strongest weapons and greatest weaknesses is rationalization. Rationalization is the mind's way of making the unbearable feel bearable. It's the quiet voice that takes chaos and wraps it in logic. And intelligent people, with their ability to analyze and construct airtight arguments, are masters at it. The excuses are endless, and they sound convincing. They just need time. Every couple has problems. We've been through so much. It would be wrong to give up now. Each explanation functions like a shield, protecting the fragile hope that things will improve. Because without these excuses, you'd have to face the raw, painful truth. The relationship is not working, and that truth feels unbearable. Here's the paradox. Intelligence, which should serve as a defense against harm, instead becomes a tool for self-deception. The smarter you are, the better you become at crafting arguments to justify staying. You can spin narratives so airtight that even you believe them. You can take your partner's worst behavior and reframe it as trauma, misunderstanding, or temporary struggle. It's not weakness, it's survival. Because without these rationalizations, you'd have to confront the shame, the loss, and the fear of starting over. Rationalization buys you comfort in the short term, even if it costs you freedom in the long term. But this defense has a hidden cost. Every time you explain away the toxicity, you erode your own clarity. Every excuse creates a gap between what you know and what you're willing to admit. And over time, that gap becomes a chasm. You lose trust in your own judgment. You start to wonder if you're the problem. If maybe you're being unfair. If maybe love always feels this way. The toxic partner benefits from this, often without even realizing it. They don't have to change, because you're rationalizing it. Bonds do the work for them. They know you'll find a reason to forgive, a reason to stay, a reason to believe in tomorrow. And so the cycle continues. What makes this even more painful is the awareness. Deep down, most people know when they're lying to themselves. There's a quiet unease beneath every excuse, a whisper that says, "You don't really believe this." But acknowledging that whisper requires courage. And until you're ready, rationalization will drown it out. Smart people often confuse rationalization with resilience. They tell themselves they're being patient, compassionate, understanding. But in reality, they're building a cage out of words, a cage strong enough to trap even the sharpest mind. The defense becomes the prison. Rationalization may protect fragile hope, but it also prevents healing. And until the lies are stripped away, until the excuses collapse under their own weight, you remain bound to someone who doesn't deserve the loyalty you've rationalized into existence. That's the danger of intelligence in love. It can build lies so strong you forget they're lies at all. One of the most powerful forces keeping people in toxic relationships isn't love. It's fear. The fear of being alone. Loneliness has a weight to it, a silence that can feel unbearable. And for many, that silence feels heavier than the daily mistreatment of a toxic partner. At least in toxicity, there is noise, there is presence, there is someone. Alone, there is nothing. Even brilliant minds, people who can outthink, outplan, and outanalyze, find themselves vulnerable here. Because when faced with the unknown, the human brain often chooses the familiar, even if the familiar is painful. The paradox is simple. People know they are suffering, yet they imagine solitude as worse. The logic goes something like this. Yes, I'm hurt here, but at least I'm not empty. At least I'm not invisible. Smart people often dress this fear up in sophisticated language. They'll say, "I just don't want to start over," or "Dating is exhausting, and I'd rather work through this than be alone." Beneath those words, though, is a deeper terror, that without this relationship they may not be wanted at all. This is where intelligence betrays them again. The same imagination that allows smart people to create, to innovate, to solve problems, also invents vivid fears about solitude. They imagine long, empty nights. They picture holidays spent in silence. They replay every story they've ever heard about people who never found love again. Their mind turns loneliness into a monster so terrifying that the toxic partner starts to look like protection. And so, they stay. Not because the relationship is good, but because solitude feels worse. The toxic partner often senses this fear. They may weaponize it with threats. "No one else will love you." "You'll regret leaving me." "You're nothing without me." Over time, those words seep into the mind, mixing with the fear already there, until leaving feels like walking off a cliff. The tragedy is that solitude, while difficult, is often the very thing needed for healing. Being alone can mean freedom, space, the rebuilding of self. But when you're inside the relationship, the unknown looms too large. And so, people cling to what they know, even if what they know is breaking them. This fear of solitude is not stupidity. It's humanity. Humans are social creatures, wired for connection. Isolation once meant danger, even death. That ancient wiring still echoes today. And so even the brightest minds can be tricked into believing that mistreatment is safer than aloneness. But here's the truth. Loneliness is a temporary state. Toxic love is a permanent wound. One heals you, the other drains you. Yet until that truth is embraced, the fear of solitude will keep even the most intelligent person tethered to the very pain they wish to escape. Because in the end, it's not the abuse that traps them. It's the fear of emptiness without it. At first, love feels like expansion. You're not just you anymore, you're us. A shared rhythm emerges. Habits align, routines fuse, inside jokes become shorthand for a private language. Over time, the relationship ceases to be something you have and becomes something you are. This shift is subtle, but it's powerful. When someone asks who you are, your answer is no longer singular. You speak in plurals: we, our, together. Your partner's preferences bleed into yours. Their music becomes your playlist. Their moods become your weather. Their world becomes a mirror you use to confirm your existence. That's the danger. When identity fuses with attachment, separation feels less like a breakup and more like amputation. Walking away isn't just leaving them. It feels like erasing a version of yourself that only exists inside the relationship. Smart people fall hardest here. They pride themselves on self-awareness, yet even they underestimate how identity can dissolve into another's shadow. They believe they're independent, logical, untouchable. But one day they look in the mirror and realize their reflection carries someone else's outline. Toxic partners exploit this entanglement. They blur boundaries until individuality is replaced with dependency. They position themselves as indispensable. You wouldn't be who you are without me. And when the thought of leaving surfaces, the question isn't, can I live without them, but who am I without them? That uncertainty is paralyzing. Psychology calls this enmeshment. Neurology calls it pattern reinforcement. But lived experience calls it identity theft, disguised as intimacy. It doesn't matter how intelligent you are. If your sense of self has been braided too tightly with another's, unraveling feels like destruction. This is why many stay long after logic tells them to go. It's not stupidity. It's not weakness. It's survival in Sir. Tinct misfering, convinced that leaving equals erasing. The brain doesn't register it as ending a relationship. It registers it as losing myself. The truth, however, is quieter and harder to see. Your identity was never truly theirs. They didn't create who you are. They only occupied a role in your story. Walking away doesn't erase you, it restores you. But that restoration comes with grief. The empty space left behind feels unbearable at first, like silence after constant noise. Yet within that silence lies recovery. It's where boundaries are redrawn, where the we dissolves back into I, and where strength slowly takes root. Identity entanglement convinces the smartest minds that escape equals annihilation. But freedom is not the destruction of self, it is the reclamation of it. Leaving doesn't make you less, it makes you whole again. Toxic relationships don't survive on constant pain. If cruelty were consistent, leaving would be simple. What keeps people tethered is the rhythm. The collapse followed by just enough repair to reignite hope. It begins with mistreatment, harsh words, withdrawal, betrayal, or neglect. The collapse feels absolute, like the entire structure of the relationship has caved in. The rational mind takes note. This is unsustainable. This has to end. And then, without warning, the shift. Apologies arrive. Affection resurfaces. Gestures of kindness appear, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes subtle. The toxic partner plays the role of redeemer, offering just enough warmth to remind you of who they were in the beginning. This isn't random. It's deliberate, whether consciously or instinctively. By alternating pain with reward, they trap you in a loop. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. You never know when the payoff will come, but when it does, the dopamine rush is blinding. Suddenly, the memory of collapse is overwritten by the intoxication of reconciliation. The cycle resets. Smart people often fall harder for this illusion because they look for patterns. They think, maybe this time the apology means real change. Maybe this kindness signals a turning point. Intelligence interprets the variation as evidence of progress rather than manipulation. The cruelty feels like an exception. The affection feels like truth. But here's the trap. Every return to hope erases the urgency to leave. The clock starts over. Instead of counting years of mistreatment, the brain says, we're starting fresh. We're rebuilding. The cycle disguises longevity as renewal, even though nothing fundamental has changed. Over time, the collapses grow deeper, the reconciliations shorter. Yet the cycle continues because the hope it manufactures is not logica, it's chemical. Dopamine and oxytocin don't measure sincerity. They only reward presence. The body interprets reconciliation as safety, even if the mind knows better. Toxic partners exploit this. They don't need to be good consistently. They only need to be good strategically, just long enough to keep you believing in the possibility of transformation. They weaponize hope, turning it into a leash. Breaking free requires confronting a brutal truth. The pattern is the relationship. The cycle isn't an obstacle to love. It is the love as it exists. There is no version of the connection outside this loop. Each collapse will be followed by another apology, another sliver of hope, another reset. And each reset is not progress, it's captivity. The hardest part is accepting that maybe this time is the lie that sustains the bond. The only way out is refusing to let reconciliation erase memory. To see the cycle not as renewal, but as repetition. Toxic love doesn't die in one dramatic ending. It ends the moment you stop believing in the reset. Leaving a toxic relationship is not an act of logic. If it were, smart people would never stay as long as they do. Every red flag would have been enough, every betrayal the final straw. But knowledge doesn't set you free. Pain does. The exit is uncomfortable because it feels like stepping into emptiness. You're not just walking away from a partner. You're walking away from a pattern, from an identity, from the hope that this time would be different. Logic can outline the reasons, but only pain has the force to push you through the door. There's no clean break. Even after deciding to leave, the mind clings to memories, rehearses excuses, replays moments of tenderness as if they could overwrite the cruelty. This is the withdrawal phase, and it feels like punishment. The very bond you're escaping fights to pull you back in. Smart people often make this stage harder because they search for the perfect explanation. They want a reason airtight enough to silence doubt, a narrative strong enough to convince themselves they aren't abandoning something that might have been saved. But there is no perfect narrative. There is only the decision to stop rationalizing pain. That's where self-reflection becomes the final key. Not reflection in the form of endless analysis. Why did they act that way? What could I have done differently? What if I'd tried harder? But reflection that turns inward. Why am I still holding on? What part of me mistakes suffering for love? Why have I let my intelligence serve denial instead of freedom? The truth is sharp. Intelligence, when misused, becomes a cage. It builds arguments for staying. It stitches together illusions. It creates convincing lies to justify endurance. Liberation comes when that same intelligence is redirected, not to defend the relationship, but to dismantle it. Not to explain the cycle, but to end it. And yes, it hurts. Breaking free does not feel like clarity at first. It feels like loss. It feels like grief. It feels like betrayal of your own hope. That discomfort is not a sign you're wrong. It's proof you're finally leaving the illusion behind. Because the exit isn't supposed to feel good. If it did, you would have left long ago. The ache is part of the cure. It's the scar left behind after surgery. The mark that something poisonous has been cut away. The paradox is complete. The smartest people stay the longest, but they also carry the greatest potential to free themselves once they stop weaponizing their own minds against themselves. The exit is uncomfortable. But discomfort is not death. It's rebirth. Intelligence has to stop being the lawyer defending the relationship and start being the architect of freedom. And in that moment, when you accept that pain is the price of liberation, you step into something your toxic partner could never offer you. A life that no longer needs a cycle to survive. Being smart doesn't make you immune to toxic love. It just gives you better tools to justify it. The shift begins the moment you stop using your mind to explain the pain and start using it to escape. If this video gave you perspective, hit subscribe and join me for more insights on relationships, psychology, and self-discovery. And remember, knowing better is not enough. Choosing better is the real breakthrough.